Hello. Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. My name is Jim, and this episode is sponsored by NFLDraftFanatics.com. Today, we are going to talk about top 50 players on the draft board as the draft board exists in October. We have the Jacksonville Jaguars picking third, and that's going to be the team of focus for this discussion. And what we're going to do to talk about top 50 players is what's known as a second round Fanatic Challenge. And I picked Jacksonville, second round Fanatic Challenge, enter the draft. And what it's going to have me do is 10 unique 2-round drafts. So it's going to go through and it does whatever selections, and then it's the Jacksonville draft board. Every team on this simulator has its own draft board. So what would the Jaguars do? And if I look at the top 5 players, those all look really good. Will Johnson, Burden, Pierce, Scorton, McMillan. I want to make sure that we talk about some other players. So I am going to look, and one wide receiver I want to talk about is Isaiah Bond, wide receiver from Texas. So he's probably wide receiver 4 in this class. I'm going to pick him in round 1. And other positions the Jaguars need would include offensive line. So let's talk about a couple of centers. I know that Mitch Morse is there, but at the same time, he's over the age of 30. So you might want to look at 2 specific centers. I want you to look at Parker Brailford and observe he's currently 149 on the player list. So I'm going to pick Parker Brailford from Alabama to the Jaguars in round 2. Okay. Another player that they would likely consider is defensive tackle Kenneth Walker from Michigan. So I'll pick him in round 1. And then there's one other center I want to talk about. So we're going to go find him on the draft board. That center is Jonah Monheim from USC. Now, when Monheim was coming out last year, he was listed as a tackle. So this is a very good offensive lineman. He's playing center for USC this year. Realistically, you can put him anywhere along the line. I think that's a great pick for Jacksonville to get offensive line help. Observe he's currently 299 on their player board. Okay, other positions that the Jaguars would consider early in the draft. I think that they're okay at edge with Trayvon Walker. You could probably use another edge, and you can see Scorton is sitting there pretty high on the draft board. You can see JT. Let's do JT. Oh, wow. So he's currently 12th on the draft board. I will pick him in round 1. So anytime you pick somebody in this simulator, they will move up in value. Whether they move up a little bit or a lot depends on a lot of things we're not going to get into here. Okay, so other players that could benefit Jacksonville. So let's look at the offensive tackle list. And some offensive tackles in round 2. Wyatt Millam from West Virginia is a top 50 player, so I will pick him. And at this point, we have done 3 2-round mock drafts. Okay. Other players, and you can see that JT went from like 12th on the draft board. He's now 6th. So other players that would be considered. If Benjamin Morrison is there, to me, he's one of the top 10 players in the draft. So the corner from Notre Dame, I'm going to pick him. And then let's look at more offensive tackles. So Josh Simmons, offensive tackle from Ohio State, likely a top 50 player. I'm going to pick him. Okay, other positions that the Jaguars may need is tight end. So there's definitely some tight ends in the top 50 that we should talk about. So I'm looking for more players. So Emory Jones, offensive tackle from LSU in round 1, I think would be a good pick for Jacksonville. And then let's follow that up with selecting a tight end. There's a few different tight ends I want to talk about. Okay, so if we look at tight ends, Luke Lachey, tight end from Iowa, is a top 50 player, so I would consider him. I think Abdul Carter, the linebacker from Penn State, you may see him listed as an edge. He played linebacker last year. I think linebacker is his better position. And he doesn't necessarily have the size to play edge at the NFL level, but Abdul Carter at linebacker would be an excellent first-round pick for the Jaguars, I think, so I'm going to pick him. And then let's go for another tight end in round 1. Or excuse me, another tight end in round 2. So we look at tight ends, and Tyler Warren, the tight end from Penn State, top 50 player. He might be tight end 1 in this draft class. And at this point, I have done 6 2-round drafts. I've got 4 more to go. Okay, so what other players would be considered in round 1? Let's look at what the offensive tackle list looks like. I've already talked about Emory Jones. Another offensive tackle to consider in round 1 is Ariante Ursary, offensive tackle from Minnesota. I have heard some people have Emory Jones as offensive tackle 1 in this class, who we just spoke about. And Ursary is going to be in the conversation in the top 4 tackles, in my opinion. And then let's continue looking at the tight ends. So more tight ends to talk about would be Mitchell Evans from Notre Dame in round 2. Top 50 player. Okay, and let's look at the offensive tackle list again. So we can see Will Campbell, Kelvin Banks, Emory Jones, Ariante Ursary are likely going to be the top 4 tackles in some order. Okay, so done at offensive tackle. From a tight end standpoint, Colston Loveland will have some conversation as to whether or not he goes in round 1. So I will pick Colston Loveland there. And then in round 2, we'll look at the offensive tackles again. I think we've already talked about every offensive tackle in the top 50. So what other defensive linemen would be there? So Walter Nolan, defensive lineman from Ole Miss, top 50 player. And then other top 50 players to talk about. In round 1, Jalen Walker, linebacker from Georgia. And again, Walker, is he a linebacker? Is he an edge? He's a really good football player. So how he would be used in a defense could be debated. Definitely one of the top 50 players. And then if I'm looking here, what other top 50 players? So in round 2, Deion Walker, defensive lineman from Kentucky. And again, I'm looking for players that I haven't talked about yet. First round corner, Denzel Burke from Ohio State. And then another defensive lineman, Joshua Farmer from Florida State. Okay, so I don't know if Farmer's going to end up in my top 50. That's a player I've been watching the last couple of weeks. I like him. Top 100, yes. Top 50, tell me how right or wrong I am. Tell me on YouTube. Find me on Twitter. If you want to find me on Twitter, my handle is @NFL Draft Fanatic. There's no I in Fanatic on my Twitter. My name is Jim. This is the Mrs. R Relevant podcast from NFLDraftFanatics.com. And we just did a second round challenge to cover 20 players in the top 50. So let's review who those 20 players are. Round 1 wide receiver, Isaiah Bond from Texas. Round 2 center, Parker Brailford from Alabama. Round 1 defensive lineman, Kenneth Grant from Michigan. Round 2 center and offensive lineman, Jonah Monheim from USC. Round 1 edge, JT Tuimoloau from Ohio State. Round 2 Wyatt Millam, tackle from West Virginia. Round 1 cornerback, Benjamin Morrison from Notre Dame. Round 2 Josh Simmons, tackle from Ohio State. Round 1 tackle, Emory Jones from LSU. Round 2 tight end, Luke Lachey from Iowa. Round 1 linebacker, Abdul Carter from Penn State. Round 2 tight end, Tyler Warren from Penn State. Round 1 tackle, Ariante Ursary from Minnesota. Round 2 Mitchell Evans, tight end from Notre Dame. Round 1 tight end, Colston Loveland from Michigan. Round 2 defensive lineman, Walter Nolan from Ole Miss. Round 1 linebacker edge, Jalen Walker from Georgia. Round 2 Deion Walker, defensive lineman from Kentucky. Round 1 cornerback, Denzel Burke from Ohio State. Round 2 Joshua Farmer, defensive lineman from Florida State. And if you're asking, okay, so what just happened? So let's think about Tyler Warren and Monheim and Brailford. And if we go to the team needs section of the site, find Jacksonville, and to the far right is a player list. This is the Jacksonville player board. Every mock draft you do on this simulator changes this board. So if we look at Parker Brailford, he moved up to 59 on the draft board. He was in the 100s when I picked him. He moved all the way up to 59. If we look at Monheim, he was in the 200s, I believe, moved up to 64. If we look at Tyler Warren, I don't remember where he was, but he is now 63 on the player board. Okay, so anytime you do a mock draft on this simulator, the players are moving. Now, if you don't like the players I picked, you can come in and do a second round challenge, and it's always on this simulator, the last guy wins. So meaning that if you skip picking Tyler Warren, you'll see him move from like 63 down to 70 or 80 as you move some players up ahead of him on the draft board. So fans have control over the player boards on this simulator. And the easiest way to do that is either a first round challenge to control round 1 or a second round challenge, which gives you a lot of control over round 1, and then it helps you begin to build the round 2 player board. Okay. If you have any questions on that, please leave a comment on YouTube. Please leave a comment on Twitter at NFL Draft Fanatic. My name is Jim. On behalf of NFLDraftFanatics.com, thank you very much for listening. And remember, every day is draft day if you have the right attitude.